All right. Now that we're recording, um, I just finished watching. Ooh, let me turn my light down a little bit because I'm farther. I just finished watching Iowa State versus Kansas State to start the college football season. First off, college football is back. Thank you. Um, I went into this game expecting one a leap from Jace Brown, not Jace Brown, Avery Johnson and Jace Brown. And then I also want to see a lot of Dylan Edwards for Kansas State side. And then on the Iowa State side, since they just put two receivers into the NFL and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, I wanted to see how their young receivers would come in week one and play. So overall, let's go. Let's go. So in the first quarter, it was very, very sloppy. And you could tell like the defenses were really in mid-season form or came a lot more prepared. Iowa State had their drive start with like four straight runs, and then as soon as they tried to pass the ball, cut. But yeah, they started off with four straight runs, and as soon as they tried to pass the ball, they had one dropped. I'm pretty sure in the first quarter, and then the next play, Rocco Betts got sacked, and then they punted to Kansas State, and then Dylan Edwards muffs the punt, and then 2 seconds later, he goes down with an injury. So Iowa State gets the ball back inside like the 20-yard line, and then they end up fumbling and giving it right back to Kansas State. So that was a second fumble. And then after that, Kansas State goes 3-and-out on their first drive. And then I want to say Iowa State, I have it in my notes. Iowa State then goes 3-and-out themselves again. So they really so both offense really just traded and having stalled drives. And then we didn't see our first pass completion from either side until about 4 minutes left in the first quarter. So that was a little weird to see. But it ended up being Iowa State striking first. And on that drive, Rocco Beck, it was like 4 plays, I want to say. Rocco Beck went 3 for 3, 47 yards. And he had the TD on the fade ball to, what was his name? I have put Dominic Overby. That was a really good ball. It was, like I said, it was a fade ball. He put it right over the shoulder of the turnaround DB. So that was good to see. And then we move on to the second quarter. Kansas State started their drive right after Iowa State scored. And then they ended up, So to start the drive, they had Jace Brown take a handoff, and then that went about, I want to say 50 yards. So they were in Iowa State territory. And then after that, they had a lot of runs. Avery got his first completion in the second quarter, I want to say. And then they ended up punching it in with his on an option play with him and his leg. So we have a tie game. And then in the second quarter, there was no. I skipped a couple fumbles. There were 3 fumbles in the first quarter, and then on the Kansas State drive right after their scoring possession, they had another fumble where right after a play where they had a screen pass and then Avery threw it behind his running back, so it ended up being a backward pass, and the running back dropped it. He ended up picking up getting like a yard, maybe 3. And then on the next play, Joe Jackson literally fumbled it right after. Now, I forgot to say this. The conditions in this game were not the best for football. It was heavy rain. The ball was slippery, and then as far as the field, it was slippery as well. But the rain were also washing away the line markers. So at halftime, they had to repaint the grass, and then it ended up washing away again. So it was really hard to tell where the ball was, and that will matter later on in the game. But we end the second quarter 7-7. Iowa State had an opportunity to go down and drive again because they had 2 timeouts, but they decided not to call one of the timeouts after they got a stop on Kansas State with like a minute to go, and they just decided to take it to half. But as far in the first half, I was a little bit disappointed in Avery Johnson because a lot of the mistakes he made were like, yeah, they were small, but he had a lot of throws which were either too low or behind his receiver. Like Jace Brown had a drop on one of his first throws, so that ended up being a drop. He had one which was behind one of his other receivers, and that ended up being uncatchable. But as the game went on, Avery looked a lot better. But in the first half, Rocco Becht looked a lot more comfortable, and he looked like a lot more in control of this game. And like I said, I was mainly monitoring the Iowa State receivers because, like I said, they were very young. A lot of them hadn't played for real. And if you look at the box score, Rocco Becht finished his game with 50% completion percentage at 183 yards and 2 touchdowns. He could have had a lot more passing yards, but there were a good amount of drops for the Iowa State receivers. Like, it doesn't show, but I know Benjamin Brammer had one. Dominic Overby had one right after his touchdown where he had a curl on the left side and he dropped it. And then I know for sure, what was his name? Another one of the Iowa State receivers, he ended up having 3 targets and 2 of them were drops. And then he also ran a route wrong, and then it almost ended up being an interception on Iowa State scoring drive. So overall, you could really see the inexperience with the Iowa State receivers, but they ended up coming out with this win. But moving on to the second half. In the second half, both offenses were a lot more comfortable and a lot more fluid. We didn't see as many mistakes. And we had... Okay. So, to start the third quarter, I know both teams, I'm pretty sure they went 3 and out to start the third quarter. But I want to say the first drive from Kansas State, I saw Avery looked a lot more comfortable. He was more fluid with his throws. The drive just ended up stalling out once they crossed, I want to say, midfield. So that was unfortunate. And then the next drive after that, Iowa State ended up scoring. And on that drive, they were very run heavy. In the second half, Iowa State was a lot more run heavy. They were willing to win more on the ground, and it ended up paying off for them. But whenever they got into like 3rd and short, 4th and short situations, they always relied on Rocco Becht and his legs. And then there were a couple times where Rocco Becht could have went down for a sack. He escapes the pocket and then ends up getting a 7-yard gain, 8-yard gain every single time. So he was very good with his legs throughout this game, escaping pressure, making plays. So I like that from him. And then on their drive, I know they ran it like 4 or 5 straight times, and then they had a play action, and he ended up finding he ended up finding Brett Eskidson, I think that's his name, where on the left side, another perfect ball. I want to say it was a fade, but I'm not too sure, but it ends up, that was Iowa State's scoring drive. And then the next drive, Kansas State responds, and they have another drive. And this drive right here is when I really realized, and I was really excited to see Avery Johnson for the rest of the season because I invested a lot of stock in him. But he ended up really dissecting this defense in the second half because he looked a lot more comfortable. Of his first, I think he ended the first half with like maybe 120 yards. He ended his game with 273 on 21 of 30 attempts. But on this drive, he ended up scoring with Jace Brown off a double move where he faked inside and got the safety bite, and he was wide open down the seam. So that was a good throw. And then Iowa State comes back and scores again. This time, Rocco Becht gets a rushing touchdown. And then right after, a 1-play touchdown for Kansas State where Avery Johnson finds Jerron Bradley on the left side, and he takes it all the way. So now, at that point, Kansas State was down 3. And in the second half, like I said, Iowa State went a lot more run heavy. But the interesting thing about that is in the first half, they were real heavy on Abu Sama, their starting running back, or their second running back, one of them. And in the second half, they randomly switched back to Carson Hansen because Carson Hansen barely got touches in the first half. And like Abu doubled his carries and touches. And in the second half, they switched back to him. And he was a monster, I tell you, in the second half. He ended this game with 16 carries and 71 yards. In the first half, he only had 15 yards. If not, he probably had like 20, 21. In the second half, he was a completely different animal. And then they ended up going real run heavy. They get to a third and short. They run a play action and they throw it to Brammer, I think his name was. So down the seam. So that ends up getting them across enemy territory. But the real play of the game here was it was fourth and short, and maybe like 4th and 2, 4th and 3, with like 2:26 to go. Iowa State comes out, and at first they tried to draw them off sides, get the easy 5 yards, and ice the game away. But after that, they run like a flat with Carson Hansen, and Beck finds him. Carson Hansen gets this down all the way to the 1 yard line, and that was game. After that, they kneeled it out. My overall thoughts on this game. I went into this game expecting fireworks. I didn't really get that into the fourth quarter, which makes sense because it was the first game of the season for them, and it was them trying to adjust to the time zone. Like they said, the broadcast said something about both teams getting there, I want to say 2-3 weeks ago. I don't know if that was true or not because it sounded kind of absurd. And then they were flying right back tomorrow. Overall, this game was definitely affected by the weather and the conditions. And then my overall questions going into the game, was Avery Johnson going to take a leap necessarily with his passing? As far as I'm concerned, he definitely took that, and I saw more of it in the second half than I did in the first half. It still left a lot to be desired. Like, he still had a lot of throws that were behind his receivers. But overall, I was impressed. He definitely looked better than he did last season. Jace Brown still looks like a big play threat with his 50-yard rush. Not 50-yard, his 33-yard rush. And then he had the touchdown. As far as Iowa State side, Rocco Beck looked comfortable. It's going to be interesting seeing them down the season with all the questions in there with their receiver room. But with their run game and how they ran the ball and their offensive line, I'm not really too worried. This game, I feel, was kind of a Big 12 championship preview. These are the two favorites to win the conference, I'm not mistaken. Kansas State was the number 1 favorite in the Big 12. But I wouldn't be surprised to see both of these teams back there. Maybe even Arizona State or Baylor. Other than that, I don't really have much more. If I had to grade everybody, I give Rocco Beck an A-. I don't really feel he made too many mistakes. He did have a fumble in the first half that led to Kansas State points, if I'm not mistaken. I'll give Avery a B. I would go maybe B+. I can't go really higher than that because he did have a lot of missed throws, and that could have been a lot better, but I couldn't be too upset with that. It's unfortunate that Kansas State lost Dylan Edwards for the rest of the game. And hold on, I skipped something. Right before Iowa State's dagger drive, or their final touchdown drive, Kansas State went for it on 4th down, and it ended up being short on an Avery Johnson run. In my opinion, it was very hard to see where the ball was. At first glance, I thought he got it, and I ended up still think he got it. But since you couldn't see the yard marker and they originally marked him short, that was kind of unfortunate. But other than that, I don't really think they could have really did anything else. As far as on the defensive side, both teams' defensive lines were really eating. This game ended up with Iowa State had a sack, and then Kansas State had 4 sacks. So this game ended up with 5 sacks total. There were 4 fumbles in the first half, and then no turnovers in the second half other than on downs. Marcus Neal had a very good game for Iowa State. Donovan McIntosh had a good game, but he dropped a pick that Rocco Beck basically threw to him. Like, it was in his hands and he just didn't catch it. Austin Romaine had a very good game at the linebacker spot for Kansas State. But other than that, I think that really wraps it up. It was a fun game to watch. The main game from week 0 that I really cared about. I might watch Kansas and Fresno State tonight, and I don't know if I'll do a video on that. I really just want to see Jalen Daniels in his final year of college. Right now, UNLV is playing Idaho State. I'm trying to watch that game because I want to see Alex Orji because he just transferred to UNLV from Michigan. But I think that will wrap it up. Thank you for watching my review, and I'm out.